Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are doing a deep dive into, well, the real economic potential of these frontier AI models. And we're focusing on a huge new benchmark. It's called GDPval.
Yeah, and GDPval is critical, I think, because for too long, trying to figure out AI's actual economic value, it's felt a bit like driving using only the rearview mirror, hasn't it? We've been stuck with these lagging indicators, like, tracking how many companies say they're using AI, or just waiting years for maybe some tiny shift in GDP figures.
Right, and as the sources we looked at point out, big inventions think electricity, computers, they take ages to really filter through the whole economy. We just can't wait a decade to figure out what today's AI can actually do. So GDPR's mission really is to give us that capability check now. It's meant to be a direct way, maybe an alternate way, to size up AI capabilities before everyone's adopted it, assessing its economic relevance right when the models drop.
Exactly. And its promise to you, listening in, is that it really tries to move past the simple academic tests we often see. This benchmark, it's specifically designed to test AI on tasks that are, well, genuinely complex, high-value professional knowledge work, stuff people get paid a lot to do. So it gives us a much clearer, hopefully unbiased picture of where AI is actually getting close to expert-level performance.
Okay, but hang on. Haven't loads of AI benchmarks claimed they measure economic relevance? How did the GDP-Vol creators really prove they got past the academic sort of parlor tricks?
I think it comes down to the sheer effort they put into realism and just covering the bases, the
Mhm.
representative breadth. They didn't just dream up some tasks. They started with the actual economy.
Hmm.
They zeroed in on the top 9 sectors that contribute over 5% each to the U.S. GDP. So think finance, healthcare, professional services, even manufacturing,
Huh.
the big hitters.
And then within those sectors, they didn't just pick random tasks. They sourced them from 44 really high-earning jobs, focusing on the kind of knowledge work that's mostly digital these days.
Yeah, and that's where the rigor really shows. The scale is just massive. The full set has over 1,000 tasks, 1,320, I think. And they're structured to cover most of the key work activities that the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks in its ONET system for those jobs. OneNet is basically the government's huge database classifying everything about jobs. So using that ensures they're measuring real professional responsibilities, not just, puzzles.
And the human baseline.
Yeah.
That sounds like the absolute key difference here. These tasks weren't just written by AI researchers, right?
Not at all. They were created by actual industry professionals, experts with, on average, 14 years of experience under their belts. They recruited them from places like Goldman Sachs, Microsoft, Apple, even the CDC, really demanding environments.
And these tasks, they weren't quick 5-minute things either.
No way. They call them long horizon tasks. The source material mentioned they took an average of 7 hours of work for an expert human professional to complete. Some were apparently so complex they actually span multiple weeks of work.
Wow, multiple weeks. That kind of complexity must involve juggling different file types too, right? Like CAD designs, videos, spreadsheets, presentations.
Definitely. They were multimodal. And in the hardest subset of the data, the bit they call the GDP-val gold subset, some tasks apparently required the model, or the human, to pull together information from up to 17 different reference files. Imagine that.
Okay, 17 files. So evaluating that kind of output must have been incredibly tough. How did they grade it fairly?
Equally rigorous approach. The main method was a blinded head-to-head comparison by human experts. So different experts, not the ones who created the task, would get the original request and two completed deliverables, one from a human, one from a model, but unlabeled. They just had to rank which one was better, basically. And apparently, grading just one of those comparisons took the grader over an hour on average.
Okay, that is intense. So given that incredibly rigorous setup, what were the first big, maybe surprising results? This is where it gets really interesting, I think. How did these top AI models actually stack up against that expert baseline, measured in, weeks of work sometimes?
Well, the first major thing that jumped out was just the speed of improvement. Looking at OpenAI's frontier models, their performance on that GDP-Vol gold subset seemed to increase pretty much linearly over time. That suggests the capability scaling we've seen is still happening rapidly and maybe even predictably.
But the big question is parity. Where are they now? We hear nearly human thrown around all the time, but what does the data actually say?
Yeah, the data really does back up the idea that the top models are getting very close to industry expert quality, at least in the final deliverable. The best performing model in this study, Claude Opus 4.1, it actually achieved a 47.6% win or tie rate on that really hard gold subset.
Okay, hold on. Nearly half the time, 47.6% on these incredibly complex tasks that take experts hours or weeks. An independent expert judged the AI's output to be either better than or equal to the human expert's work. That number, that feels genuinely impressive given how hard these tasks sound.
It really is. And what's also fascinating is how they got there. The models showed some interesting differences. Claude Opus 4.1, for example, seemed to really excel in more subjective things like aesthetics, making documents look polished, getting slide layouts just right.
Ah, interesting. And the sources said GPT-5 was stronger on accuracy.
That's right. Things like carefully following all the steps in complex instructions, getting calculations bang on, avoiding errors.
So maybe GPT-5 for the number crunching, Claude for the presentation.
Kind of, yeah. And that showed up in the file types, too. GPT-5 tended to do better on pure text tasks where it's all about the language. But Claude did better when it had to manipulate things like PDFs, Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoint files, maybe showing stronger visual and formatting integration, like you said.
Okay, this brings us right to the crunch, the economic reality of it all. We know they can produce something expert level almost half the time, but what does a 47.6% success rate actually mean for saving time and money in the real world?
Right. And if you just look at the raw speed, what the study calls the naive ratio, the numbers look completely wild, like science fiction. If you imagine a world with zero human review, no quality control needed, which is pure fantasy, obviously then GPT-5 looks something like 90 times faster than an unaided human expert.
90 times. Okay, yeah, pure fantasy. Because in the real world, you have to have human oversight. You just have to.
Exactly. And this is where digging into the source material really pays off, because it gives you that crucial context. When the study modeled more realistic scenarios, AI helping, but with mandatory human review, that potential payoff shrinks dramatically. You've got to factor in the time it takes the human expert to review the AI's work. That averaged about 109 minutes in their grading setup. And crucially, you also have to account for the probability that the model's output is just so bad, the human has to scrap it and redo the whole thing themselves.
Right. So the AI might save, say, 7 hours of drafting. But if it then takes 2 hours to check it, and maybe 1 out of every 3 times, the human reviewer just says, nope, got to start over. The actual time saved gets pretty small pretty fast. Quality control really is the bottleneck, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. So under the study's most, let's say, realistic scenario, they called it try in times, then fix it yourself, which acknowledges failure happens. GPT-5 ended up showing about a 1.39 times speed improvement and about a 1.63 times cost improvement compared to a human expert working alone. So savings are definitely there. They're possible, but they're, let's say, marginal, not revolutionary in these super complex scenarios. The economic value really hinges on how good that first draft from the model is.
And what was the biggest reason the experts ended up rejecting the AI's work? When it failed, why did it fail?
Across the board, for all the models they tested, the number one reason the human experts preferred the human deliverable was pretty simple: failure to fully follow instructions.
So it's not necessarily about raw intelligence, it's about obedience.
Yeah.
Or maybe just carefulness.
In many cases, yeah, seems like it. Although GPT-5 actually had the fewest instruction following problems overall.
Yeah.
It most often lost points because of formatting errors. Especially, it seems, in things like PowerPoint presentations. And while formatting seems fixable, the analysis they did on how bad the failures were is sobering. For GPT-5, roughly 29% of its failures were rated by the human experts as either bad or even catastrophic.
Catastrophic, that sounds dramatic, although maybe familiar from some human presentations too. Did the sources give examples of what catastrophic meant in this context?
Yeah, they defined it as output that was like dangerously wrong or just incoherent answers or even rambling nonsense. Basically, the model completely misunderstood what was asked, or it hallucinated stuff that would be actively harmful or embarrassing if a professional actually used it. It really highlights that you're not getting consistent quality, there's a distribution, and that failure tail can be really severe.
Okay, but if the main failure modes are somewhat predictable, like not following instructions properly or messing up formatting, does the study show we can actually fix those with simple interventions?
Yeah, the data on what they call scaffolding looked really encouraging. Scaffolding, for anyone listening, is basically just giving the AI extra deliberate instructions or prompts to force it to be more careful or rigorous in a specific way. Even just turning up the model's reasoning effort, they tested low, medium, high settings that consistently improved performance on its own.
And they actually engineered a clever prompt specifically to tackle those annoying formatting errors, didn't they?
They did, yeah. A custom scaffolding prompt, it essentially told GPT-5, okay, before you submit this deliverable, rigorously check it. Render files as images so you can see them. Avoid weird characters.
Mm.
They were basically forcing the model to use its own multimodal abilities, its ability to see images, to act as its own little quality control checker.
Huh. Forcing it to self-inspect. What happened when they did that?
Pretty impressive results, actually. That specific scaffolding prompt boosted the human preference win rate by 5 percentage points. And maybe more importantly, it slashed the rate of really bad formatting errors in PowerPoint files from a shocking 86% down to 64%. And the proof is in the pudding. The agent's documented use of those multimodal inspection capabilities went from only 15% of the time up to 97%. It really suggests there are potentially big, maybe even easy performance gains still on the table just by prompting or maybe training these models to be more methodical and careful.
That's hopeful. But we do have to circle back to a key point. These GDPval tasks, they were very precisely specified. They gave the AI everything it needed. What happens when the instructions aren't crystal clear, like, most of the time in real professional work?
That is the big limitation the researchers themselves flagged, definitely. The current tasks basically spoon-feed the context. So they ran an extra experiment using what they called underspecified prompts that were about 42% shorter, leaving out some crucial background info. And yeah, model performance dropped significantly. Why? Because the models just struggled. They couldn't easily figure out the implied context or exactly what the deliverable needed to look like without that explicit human guidance.
Right. And we also need to remember this is just the first version of GDPval. It's focused purely on digital, sort of self-contained knowledge work.
Mm.
It deliberately leaves out things like manual labor, obviously, but also tasks needing deep tacit knowledge, or using specialized company software, or involving complex back-and-forth communication,
Yeah.
which are all huge parts of many high-value jobs.
Exactly. For now, it seems the models are at their best when they're executing known, complex procedures where you can give them all the instructions and all the reference documents right at the start.
So wrapping this up, what's the big picture here? This deep dive seems to confirm AI is capable of producing startlingly good, expert-level work on complex digital tasks, at least some of the time. But the real-world economic payoff isn't guaranteed. It really seems to depend heavily on minimizing that human review bottleneck, fixing predictable slip-ups like instruction following, and critically, humans getting much better at providing that crystal clear context up front.
Yeah, I think if you connect this to the bigger picture, AI's current superpower seems to be executing complex, known processes based on very explicit instructions and detailed materials. That's where it shines. But its weaknesses really come to the fore when things get ambiguous, when you need the unspoken tacit knowledge, or when the messy realities of human interaction and negotiation come into play. Those are still the things that define expert human value, it seems.
Okay, and as we finish, here's maybe a final provocative thought for you to chew on. Remember, those GDPval tasks, the full set, they represent work often valued at hundreds, even thousands of dollars. One task was apparently pegged at $32,000. And the biggest reason the AI fails on them is just not following instructions carefully. So given that, how much of the final usable performance of AI actually depends not just on the underlying model, but on the skill of the human expert in clearly specifying, prompting, and maybe even scaffolding the complex tasks they want the AI to do? That's something for you to consider as you think about applying this knowledge.